Welcome to the Two Gurus Talk Compliance podcast with me, Kristy Grant-Hart. I'm here with the one and only Tom Fox. This week, we're covering why half of all compliance officers report having anxiety at work, how Politico is covering a big bribery scandal in the making, the chilling effect of the new executive orders for lawyers, and the saga of Florida man trying to outrun a police horse. But first, Tom, how's your week been, and what do you think is the most interesting development?
The developments are coming fast, crazy, and often. But I would say because of where I live, last weekend we had a huge wildfire.
Oh.
And it was about 30 miles from where I live. Fortunately, the wind took it the other way. But it burned 10,000 acres over 3 days. And it was just whipped by wind. And that's the first time we've had a big one in my part of Texas. Everybody here is thinking about that right now.
I bet they are. Welcome to the California world, man. Good grief. All right, we have a very full slate today, don't we, Tom? Lots to talk about. Where do you want to start?
I want to start with the zeitgeist, the cultural zeitgeist, because Severance has ended its second season, and there was a great piece in the New York Times, I would say maybe parody, but actually I think it's true. And it is the world of innies and outies. And no, we're not referring to belly buttons. We're referring to your innie self and your outie self. And that is defined in Severance as your innie is your work self and your outie is your non-work self. And the premise of Severance is they, of course, are split literally by brain surgery severance. My wife and I like to watch shows straight through, so we haven't watched it, so I can't comment on season 2 yet. But once again, I won't presuppose to speak for you, but my innie was always my outie because I was a lawyer. And I was a lawyer at work. I was a lawyer at home. Non-lawyers are called civilians for a reason. And it was not innie and outie for Tommy. It was being a lawyer. Now, perhaps I'm less inflexible about that now, but I'm still a lawyer. That's really not something that I ever did or thought about, which was having a kind of a separate personal life from my work life. I worked hard, I played hard, I lived life with gusto as a trial lawyer, as I thought you were supposed to do back then. And this part is interesting, but the article is just fascinating to me, Kristy, because it is a real thing. And people sort of quote their innie self and their outie self. And they talk about, I may be buttoned up and dressed conservatively at work, and when I get home, or I'm not. Or when I go out, I'm not. That sort of thing. Sometimes the zeitgeist interferes with the workplace.
Nothing says popular culture phenomenon like the Two Gurus Talk Compliance when we're looking at what's happening in the cultural zeitgeist. Yeah, I don't know. It reminds me of those what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas ads, right? Whether or not there is a you that goes to work and the you that doesn't go to work. And it's interesting, Tom, because I thought you were going to go a different direction with this, because in another installment of our ever popular series, Kristy's Unpopular Opinions, there has been a trend for years about bringing your whole self to work, right? This idea of the severance of your innie and your outie and bringing them both to work together as a whole person. But honestly, I don't want everyone to bring their whole self to work. I really don't. I think there's a really big difference between hiding your true self, such as your sexual orientation or your religion or something that really is core to who you are, and bringing your whole self, including home life dramas or dating dramas or those types of things into the workplace, which I think can be challenging for some people. Do you think that some severance is good? Complete compartmentalization is one thing, but do we want a bit of an inner and outie so that we have these different personas at work and not?
This actually bleeds to another story we're going to talk about, which is generations in the workplace. And you are so Gen X. You're just classic.
I am not. I am a Zennial, sir. I am 6 months off being a millennial. It puts me into this weird category of both. But yes, okay, go ahead.
No, and you guys are all business. And let's set me the goal. Give me the tools and skills I need, and I'll go off and I will solve whatever problem you have given me. And this is not a team collaborative effort like you boomers. This is not, okay, I have to have guardrails around. It's just tell me what to do and I'll go do it. And that's That's the way I saw you run Spark. You were there as a leader if needed, but you have very competent people. You told them what you expected of them, and you gave them their own space to succeed in that endeavor. And you were obviously very successful based upon your recent transaction. So it's a complete celebration, frankly, of you and your leadership style. But that's just, once a lawyer, always a lawyer. That's the way I was raised professionally.
I'm telling you, man, getting out of that lawyer mentality. When we were doing this exciting transaction, as you said, which, by the way, for anyone who doesn't know, Spark Compliance has been acquired by Diligent, and we're delighted. I remember when we were in the middle of some of the M&A negotiations, and at one point I said, can I just talk to the real people? And by the real people, I meant, can the lawyers please stop talking to each other? And despite being a lawyer, I was in that moment one of the real people, because sometimes it's just easier to talk to humans. So it's funny when even a lawyer refers to the other lawyers as the not humans at that point. That's who's coming to the Two Gurus, man. We got all these like lawyer people, inner and outie. And that's who we are, including when we're in Lisbon. So I'm going to talk, Tom, about, as you may know, last week I was in Portugal at the SCCE's European Conference, and it was there that I heard about a major new proposal by the European Commission that would have major implications for the due diligence transparency laws. And I was interested, Tom. I don't think this is getting as much attention in the United States, but it could be a very big deal. The article I drew this summary from is from the law firm of White and Case, and it's titled EU Omnibus Package, 10 Things You Should Know About the Proposed Changes to Key Sustainability Legislation. So the usefully, helpfully titled Omnibus Package introduces suggested changes to key EU laws on sustainability reporting, due diligence, and trade. So this freaked out a whole lot of people. But let's be clear, this is still a proposal. There is no change in the law, at least yet. So these changes need approval from the other two parts of the European government, the Parliament and the Council, which could take several months. Now, what are these major changes? Fewer companies will be caught by the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, otherwise known as CSRD. That's because the definition of large companies would change, reducing the number of in-scope reporting companies by 80%. So that's a big deal. The first wave of CSRD reporting is already underway, as many large companies are well aware, and that will stay that way. However, under this proposal, the second and third waves of CSRD reporting may be postponed, but not canceled. And what about our good friend, the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, known as CSDDD? Under the proposal, these deadlines would be pushed by 1 year. So the proposal removes the EYU liability regime under CSDDD. So our brand new regulator has gone away, leaving enforcement to national laws. But victims will still have access to justice, and companies may have the good fun time of different liabilities depending on country. And look, there's a significant upside for smaller companies under the proposal. So reporting standards will be simplified with fewer mandatory data points, which will be massively useful for smaller suppliers. And due diligence requirements under CSDDD will focus only on direct suppliers as opposed to indirect suppliers, unless there is evidence of supply chain risk from those indirect suppliers. So, Tom, I think this could be a really important development. Some analysts are saying that this is a big move from the EU toward more reasonable regulation, making it more competitive. Others are saying the sky is falling. It's the end of the EU's commitment to sustainability, transparency, due diligence. What do you think this is? Which is this?
I guess I didn't think of any of those questions when I was reading this. First of all, it made me realize just how difficult, it's not difficult, that's not the right word. There's so many different regulations in this space that the breadth and scope of what you have to know, you have to program, you have to teach your AI, whatever it is you're doing is huge. Yep. And I'm not sure how one person could do it all, frankly. That's number one. Number two is, and this is going to be a theme a little bit later in this podcast, is when is the Trump administration going to start saying, oh, no, you can't pass a law in your country. If you do, we'll put sanctions on you and we will punish you. And I wondered if we're going to start to see that. Now, we haven't seen it yet, but they're going to kill all the lawyers first, then they're going to do this. I guess I would have to say I'm agnostic as to thinking or determining a motivation. I'm with you that I think it could be something that would relax regulations for smaller companies. But the big ones are going to have to follow it. And that's where we get the most litigation, typically in Europe, maybe even in the U.S., when a Facebook or a Google or someone gets a heavy spanking because they've zigged when the EU zagged. I guess I should applaud this as an effort. I don't think it's the sky is falling and a complete cutback of their commitment. I think it may be a retrenchment.
Yeah, I actually think it's reasonable. I'll probably regret saying that someday. Don't quote me, despite the fact I'm on camera saying it. But I think it may actually be helpful to keeping it balanced with making sure you're moving in the right direction toward transparency and toward good due diligence, but with fewer huge obligations and overreach and scope creep. I think it could be a good thing for them. We'll see what the council and the parliament think. We'll find out soon. All right, back to our discussion about differential in the workplace with big different generations at work. Tom, you picked this one from HR Exchange. Tell me about this.
So I'm really endlessly fascinated by the 5 generations we have in the workplace, and we may be moving towards 6 with Gen Alpha. And there are differences, and this article lays some of those out, and I just wanted to highlight one of around leadership or management. And it posited that baby boomers prefer participatory leadership. Gen X values independence and clear objectives. Millennials often need detailed instruction and frequent feedback. Gen Z typically requires clear boundaries and expectations. And that means you may have to manage in 4 or 5 different styles. And my daughter's 27, obviously a very different generation than me. And when I talk to her, I can sense the difference in how she would approach things. She just moved from a long-term temporary position to a permanent position at the company she works. And we had long talks on how she should present her salary demands or requests, and then how she should negotiate after they come back. And she was really at a loss how to do that. I laid it out, and she did it, and then they came back and wasn't what she wanted. So I said, give me the feedback they gave you. And I said, here's what you can present next. And they eventually got it all worked out. But I typically work with people our generation and older, and typically tend to think alike. And if you're in a position where you're going to have those types, and we haven't even gotten into the other types that may be at work in terms of neurodiversity, in terms of innovation and collaboration. And so I think the job is going to become more difficult as a leader or manager, and that may fall the hardest on middle managers because they're typically the leaders in a large organization of who someone would report to. And we ain't even got to the lawyers yet. I don't know how this is going to impact lawyers, but I find this subject, Tom, endlessly fascinating.
Lawyers could never manage anybody anyway, except themselves. Come on, that's not going to change.
Fair enough.
All right, when I was reading this, I thought it was very interesting, but I kind of stopped dead in my tracks at one point when they said that Gen Zers are turning down promotions. So this may be my Zennial self, right? For those of you who don't know, Zennial is late Gen X, early Millennial, right? Because we actually don't really fit comfortably in either. But I'm just trying to imagine turning down a promotion, especially early in my career, Tom. Would that ever have occurred to you, to turn down a promotion?
Never.
Impossible. All right, let's keep with our workplace theme and find out how all generations are experiencing work as compliance officers. And in the short answer is badly. This next article comes to us from our friends at Corporate Compliance Insights, and it's titled, "Half of Compliance Officers Have Anxiety. Their org chart might be the culprit." Okay, so this is from their big survey. And how bad is the news? Nearly half of compliance officers report having anxiety, and 29% experience depression, with many pointing to their jobs as the major cause. What's happening here? It's the usual suspects: Long hours, regulatory pressure, the fear of personal liability, all of these things are contributing to those mental health challenges. And this is where the survey takes an interesting turn. So the report separates what it calls effective and ineffective reporting structures. And those with ineffective reporting structures report twice as much stress as those in effective reporting structures. Now, what does that mean? Ineffective reporting structures include most compliance officers reporting to legal, audit, risk, other folks, as opposed to effective lines, which report to either the CEO and or board of directors. What else did the survey find? 78% of compliance officers work over 41 hours a week, with 23% working 50 or more hours. Now, is there any good news? Kind of there is. 51% of compliance officers report feeling burned out. This is actually an improvement from 59% in 2022. So an 8% increase in people feeling less burned out. And there's a lot to unpack here, Tom. What surprised you here or struck you most about the findings in this survey?
Interestingly, I read another survey about CISOs, Chief Information Security Officers, and many of the things that you talked about in this piece were talked about in the CISO piece. That's sort of part one. Part two is I've been working long hours a long time, and I've worked under stress for a long time. And that's a pretty first world problem to have in my book. It means you're pretty high up. And I'm not quite sure. I have had parts of my life that got too stressful for me. And so I had to step back a little bit. But that's really on me, I think. And I'm not quite sure how to make these changes in the CCO or compliance function provision, because I think compliance is only going to become more important, and we're going to be faced with, even a little bit earlier when we talked about the EU Omnibus Act, and you're going to have to know more or have resources to more. We haven't talked in this podcast about Gen AI or other innovative or disruptive technologies that we may be incorporated. I find all of this incredibly exciting. Is it the org chart? Is it who you report to? Is it the pressure you're under to prevent bribery and corruption or reputational damage? In the CISO piece, they talked about invisible success, meaning that nobody applauded the CISO when they didn't get attacked. They only screamed when there was a problem. And there's going to be a problem. That's kind of how I shook out.
Yep. Yeah, it's a little bit status quo. It's a stressful job, and it's probably not getting less stressful. Maybe what we need to focus on is coping techniques to deal with that kind of stress, and perhaps that's the best way to do it.
I've never heard you say this, but probably every in-house lawyer I ever heard who went from private practice to in-house said, I went in-house for the lifestyle change. Guess what? You weren't counting those billable hours, but you're still working them.
I don't think it's ever as bad as Big Law. But anyway, okay, so let's go to fighting cartels and small currency transactions. Tell me, Tom.
Sure. So this is a really interesting little tidbit from the Trump administration for counties that are along the border, literally from Texas to California, now have to report transactions of $200 or more. And this is cash check companies. This is companies that would wire money from workers in Texas down to families in Mexico. It was money transfer organizations. But $200 is an incredibly low threshold. If I could pair it with a minute for the FTO, or Foreign Terrorist Organization designation on cartels, this is clearly an attempt to get at the way cartels launder money, which was through huge amounts of transactions at very low amounts, which prior to this change went under the system undetected, and now they're going to be detected. I really want to, I put it in here, one, to talk about this low threshold, but I want companies and people to understand the world has changed on the border with this FTO designation, and this is not a cartel showing up saying we're going to kill all your people. Now, this is sophisticated protection schemes with shell companies and payments that have been routinely made in northern Mexico and other places where the cartels control things, that companies are going to have to look very closely at, because it is almost a strict liability regime now. And this, I think, will add to that. And once again, I have to emphasize $200 is next to nothing for the transfer of money. So there's going to be a lot more reporting. Companies that never had to do this before, mom and pop money transfer shops, are going to have to do this, or they're going to be shut down.
Okay. All right. This reminds me of the articles that we've recently covered here at the Two Gurus Talk Compliance, one of my favorite topics, of the $800 small package exemption from the U.S. Customs and Border Patrol, where companies send small value packages to avoid review by the U.S. CBP, some of which is made with modern slavery, which is sort of my focus on it, but some of which include things like fentanyl, which are really big problems. But you can't go reviewing all of those under $800 packages unless you're going to hire thousands and thousands more officers to do the reviewing. So there's this complicated push-pull between what would be an ideal state, which is looking at everything, and what we actually can accomplish. Now, when I look at this $200 threshold, it seems to me, even with some of our AI tools, that it will be impossible to try to figure out which of these are legitimate and illegitimate transactions, Tom. Is this all fire with no teeth?
That's a really interesting angle. Here's the other thing I have thought about, the other thing I thought I'm articulate today. Here's the other rabbit trail I went down. Is this a way to catch people who may be in the United States wiring money to their family back in Mexico? I'm going to leave that question open.
Open indeed. All right, let's move on to our next article, which comes from friend of the pod, Matt Kelly of Radical Compliance. Side note, I have had the pleasure of spending time with Matt twice in the past 2 weeks in 2 different continents. How lucky am I? First in Lisbon at the European SCCE conference, then in his hometown of Boston earlier this week at the Compliance Week Ethics and Compliance Summit. Shout out to you, Matt. This article could be titled Loose Lips Sink Ships, but it isn't. Instead, it's titled Compliance Program and Leaks, and it's all about what happens when information companies don't want out there gets leaked. Now, the article goes in many different directions and has a lot of good points, but what I found most interesting was Matt's take about when management tells employees specifically not to leak something. Then not only do those employees leak the information itself, but after that, they leak that management told them not to. And he said that is a sign of a deeply dysfunctional corporate culture. Obviously, leaking information relating to investigations, trade secrets, and innovation can be catastrophic for a company, but embarrassing management decisions and out-of-touch statements, frankly, can be just as problematic from a reputational and going viral standpoint. Now, we've talked a lot on this episode, surprisingly, about this whole being a lawyer thing. And there was a radically popular blog that still exists called Above the Law for Big Law Lawyers. And it's where every ham-fisted, dumb management decision was leaked and published for all the world to see in Big Law. So we could see the ridiculously silly emails forwarded that were printed for publication. And obviously, we know Big Law has a dysfunctional culture, right? And the entire blog is dedicated to all the ways things go wrong and how managers tell people not to leak things that then immediately show up on the site. But what do you think about Matt's take when it comes not to a culture of an entire industry, but specific to a singular company? Do these leaks equate to a dysfunctional culture, or is it just human nature to want to indulge in gossip and sharing of juicy information?
He and I actually debated this exact question on Compliance Into the Weeds, because he cited to Facebook where 20 people had been terminated for leaking after being told not to leak, and they leaked that information. My question was, how many employees does Facebook have? And Matt said 70,000. I said, it's a pretty low sample size to declare the entire culture dysfunctional. Now, it may be, and we hear stories. I just read a book review by a former employee, disgruntled or not. I don't know. I've worked in very large corporations, 70,000 now that I think about it, and everybody gets disgruntled from time to time. But I guess the answer is I don't know, because I can't really tell. If it's so bad as the Facebook people described it, you would think they would have left unless they were making a ton of money and couldn't afford to leave. I think listening to you, Kristy, I may now lean more towards that's just the way we're wired. And this is just a different form of gossip. The other thing is when you're trying to persuade, whether in the case of the Facebook employees, or you're trying to persuade Mark Zuckerberg, or you're trying to persuade others, what you try to do is get the information out to a broader group of people so they can put pressure on this narrower group of people who are trying to keep the information within a tighter circle. So something like that may be going on as well. But as Matt and I ended our podcast, the beatings will continue until morale improves.
Hallelujah. All right. What happened in Big Law this week, Tom? After all of our discussion of Big Law, things are not going well over there, are they?
Things are going very badly. The president issued a couple of executive orders banning essentially law firms who represented either Democrats or ones took positions he didn't like, and banned U.S. government employees from interacting with them. Now, this didn't extend to judges, but everybody else was not supposed to deal with them. All security clearances were pulled. All contracts, if any, with the government were pulled. And it was as draconian announcement as we have ever seen around this. The story I picked was not the first one. Coey Perkins was the first one, or Perkins Coey, excuse me. But we've talked about the cognizant executives trial on this podcast several times. We looked like we were finally going to have a date, or at least a date by which the government would have to dismiss, because it's April 7th for the trial to begin. Paul Weiss was put on one of these lists. And one of the co-defendants, Stephen Schwartz, former chief legal officer, fired Paul Weiss. And then Paul Weiss withdrew, or is attempting to withdraw from the case. Now, April 7th, 2 weeks, baby. And that is this has been going on for 6 years, and I won't reiterate all the things we've talked about. But now, Schwartz wants 6-month continuance for his new lawyers, allegedly Sullivan and Cromwell, to get up to speed and try the case. And the court is having none of this. The court issued an order today which said there are 3 law firms in this case. Paul Weiss is one. And I want to hear from the other 2 law firms. Are they prepared and ready to go to trial on April 7th? If not, why not? Because they too have been a part of this for many years. And Sullivan and Cromwell may have a lot of work to do to get up to speed, but they have 2 other law firms who could at least take the lead. So the court seems to be very put off by this. But this is beyond the law in any way, shape, or form that is possible. And for him to go after law firms that either took positions against the Trump administration or represented Democrats is just so far beyond the legal pale. I can't tell you how much this bothers me.
Yeah. The EEOC is looking into 20 different law firms to see if their DEI programs are or were illegal in an industry which has extraordinarily low minority and female representation at the highest levels. It's very worrying what's happening in that industry and in our industry, and I guess we're going to continue to wait and see what happens next. So shall we stay with depression? Because I'm having a good time with this one. This one is from the Wall Street Journal. It's titled, Job Seekers Hit Wall of Salary Deflation. So it used to be if you wanted a significant salary increase, the best move was to change jobs. So your current job will typically only give you a small raise each year, while a new job might push you up faster. But those were the good old days, like in 2023, where job switchers enjoyed a 7.7% raise on average compared to 5.5% for job stayers. But that gap has collapsed. So the pay increase for job switchers has dropped to 4.8%, barely higher than the 4.6% increase for those staying in their roles. Sorry to be a downer, but it's getting worse. Many offers are coming in $10,000 to $40,000 lower than expectations, including in the technology sector. And professionals who secured higher salaries during the pandemic, y'all want to stay where you are, as it's unlikely to find a higher paying job now. Salaries are firm. So, Tom, the fact that you could help your daughter negotiate anything is surprising, according to the Wall Street Journal, because they said, look, if a role is advertised at $100,000, that's what it pays. Now, unsurprisingly, quitting rates recently hit their lowest level since 2020, and economists expect even fewer to quit this year. The journal reported that internal promotions are often a, quote, dry promotion, unquote, with a bigger title with more responsibility, but no significant pay increase. Now, look, the idea, Tom, of a dry promotion is a little depressing, but at least it's a promotion, because many folks I talk to in the industry get more work and higher levels of work without a promotion in either title or pay. Is this a short-term problem? Are we in for a bumpy ride? Where are we going here?
We're between a bumpy ride and wait and see. And we have to, I think, wait and see because of we're all waiting to see what will be the next round of rules around FCPA. And I think many compliance professionals and corporations may well recalibrate. At that point, I think you and I have been really strident in saying, no, now that is the time to invest and get things done, even if in this interim period, and perhaps we could do a whole pod on, we will do a whole pod on that. Let me rephrase that next week when we record in your new position. A little teaser there for our audience. But, I guess the other thing implicit in all of this is the economy. And at this point, none of us know where the economy is going to go. I don't think we're in depression yet. Are trending in that direction, perhaps. The tariffs. The thing I worry the most, though, Kristy, is uncertainty for business, because that's one thing they beat into us in every corporation I was with. No surprises. Tell bosses if something bad's going to happen. You can have bad things happen as long as people are prepared. And with what the government is doing in terms of tariffs and other regulations and sanctions, if you're going to do it, don't reverse it 24 hours later, because of the chaos it causes, and it's chaos to American businesses and American economies, not the economies outside the United States. So that's perhaps for me the most unsettling thing, and the biggest reason I might see uncertainty at this point is we're still uncertain about where the economy is going.
Yep. Here's one we never cover. We don't cover things, not that you can tell in today's episode, but we actually don't cover things that Politico tends to cover, although those are intersecting more and more right now. What is Politico reporting on in a pretty brilliant way?
And it's a lot of people are reporting on this, the FT, the BBC, and other international news organizations that I check in with. But Huawei has gotten in trouble in the EU for allegedly bribing EU legislators. And there have been arrests, there have been dawn raids, and it's definitely not a good look for Huawei and all of the bad things that the U.S. government said about them. Maybe there's some truth to all of that. It's certainly going to put Huawei back in the spotlight in a very negative way, and it's going to highlight, I think, for the Trump administration, the dangers of some Chinese manufacturers or other organizations in telecoms or other similar businesses to Huawei. And you ended your notes saying where there's smoke, there may be fire. And I think you're spot on here. I think there's fire, and Huawei got caught. What the fallout will be, both directly in the EU and indirectly from the United States, I think it's an open question, but it could be severe.
Listen, I think that one of the lessons for compliance officers in this one is, especially when I worked in Europe for 9 years with the UK, which was Europe at that point, and with Europe constantly. And there is frequently a sense within Europe that the lobbying, the lobbyists, the idea that the way that the American lobbying system works or the other country lobbying systems work, the EU is above that essentially, right? That there is no improper activities within the EU and the Commission, the Parliament, etc. And I think that this is one of those stories where we can say, look, corruption is a universal experience and you're not immune from that with your legislation in the EU. And I think that this can actually be one of those great sort of learning lessons where we say, look, it happens everywhere, including here, and we need to be paying attention to it. So this one's going to be developing. I imagine this is not the last time we'll cover this one as we get more details and continue to go out.
With that, fan favorites?
It's Florida Man. So let's finish on a happy note. It's happy for me because I get to use puns, and that's always a happy time. So, Florida Man, this one should be titled up, Giddy Up and Lock Him Up. Florida Man Jordan Wilson thought he was in the clear after doing a drug deal in Jacksonville, Florida. What he hadn't seen was a mounted officer with a mare named Nash. These two weren't just horsing around, and when Mr. Wilson started running from the police, Nash ran after him in hot pursuit. With a neigh straight out of the Wild West movie, our Florida Man corralled after a quarter-mile sprint. It ended with him face down and out of luck. The Jacksonville Sheriff's Office posted the thrilling footage on social media, with Mr. Wilson ultimately taken for a ride of his life straight to jail. Just goes to show you that in Florida, Tom, there's no horseplay when it comes to justice, because justice is the main priority.
God bless Florida Man.
God bless Florida Man. Thank you for listening. Until next time, I'm Kristy Grant-Hart.
And I'm Tom Fox.